I think I saw her join. I'm going to kick off and just intro Irrational Labs for folks who don't know us, and then hopefully Logan will pop in. And I'll put down the chat here. If you don't know me, my name is Kristen. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Irrational Labs. Started around 10 years ago, and really excited to see the evolution of what this community has become and the growth of behavioral science in general. And so you're here because you're a member of the Irrational Labs community, and or you're taking the behavioral science bootcamp course. So actually raise your hands if you're taking the course right now or you have taken the course. Folks who've taken the course, and then maybe just shoot them right up if you finish the course and you're like, you have done the thing. You've gotten the self-control to complete each week, done the exercises. Amazing. See so many hands going up. And so membership really is about extending your relationship with us and having more at-bats to learn behavioral science. Come see folks like Logan and others really talk about their experience bringing behavioral science into the organization. And so if you have not, we've just introduced a lot more Slack channels to kind of facilitate that. One of my favorites is Ask a Behavioral Scientist, where you can shoot us a question. James just shot one a couple days ago or yesterday. James can tell you the experience, but we hope to answer them in around 24 to 48 hours. And so you get access to the Irrational Labs behavioral science team for one-off questions. We do psychologies of the week. We post the things that we're reading. And so it's a really great way to more than dip your toe into the field, but really start embodying it with your day-to-day work. And so we're always open to feedback for the members. And if you're in the course, you can look forward to hopefully continuing with us and sticking around and staying in the Slack group. And we also have fun events. So, or we think they're fun. We're probably obviously biased. For this, but so we had usually 3 to 4 events a month. We had an ask Kristen, so I just took random questions from you guys. I thought it was quite fun. We have our session today with Logan, and then coming up a session I'm also very excited about with Julie O'Brien. Julie was a behavioral scientist at the Duke Lab with Danny Ariely. She then went to Weight Watchers and was a behavioral scientist there, and now she's leading a team of behavioral science at US Bank. And so wide variety of experience taking the theory and helping teams really bake it into their strategy. But today is not about Julie O'Brien. Today is about Logan. So I'm going to actually stop share because I can't see the crew when I do this. Wonderful. So there we go. Logan's here. I'm gonna pin you, Logan.
I'm ready for it. I'm ready.
Ready for it. Wonderful. So you guys, if you're here, you probably know or have heard of Logan, but I'll do the reveal right now. Logan and I are also very good friends. So we may joke if we say anything, just know that there's a deep friendship behind it. We met at Google. Logan was a Googler, and we collaborated to bring behavioral science to life within Google, running, I would say, worked with over 50 teams, around 25 experiments, and really kind of helped bring behavioral science into Google. And then if you've also read some of our stuff, you know that we live in a co-living community, compound, some say commune, where we share life. So Logan has an apartment right next to ours. We have 14 other people that we live with, and we can talk more about that later. But today, if you have not, actually keep your hands raised or take your hand down and then re-raise them again if you've read How Not to Die Alone. Or put up your actual hand. Okay, so Logan wrote a book, How Not to Die Alone, which takes behavioral science principles and applies them to dating. So it takes all the things about the theory of decision making and helps people find love. And she's also the behavioral scientist, relationship scientist at Hinge. So gets to see on the ground what happens when people are looking for love. It has helped, I would say, millions of folks at this point on their journeys. And so not only are we friends, but I'm a deep admirer of her thinking and her approach to this. So with that, one, if you have not bought How Not to Die Alone, would recommend it after this. But how this is going to work, Logan's just going to do a quick intro about her work, a few minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions and Q&A. And I love hearing how Logan answers questions. So this should be pretty good. I'll manage the chat and so I would say put them in the chat and then we'll pick them. If there aren't questions, then I'll stop peppering Logan. So with that, maybe Logan, do a few minute intro, get folks on board.
Sure.
What you typically think about.
Absolutely. Yes. Kristen, thanks for the great intro. And yes, as Kristen said, we are good friends and technically housemates. So there's a lot of depth behind our relationship. I wanted to share just a few of my favorite concepts from my book and from the individual coaching that I do. So one that I thought I would start out with is this idea of the prom date versus the life partner. And this is a really interesting one in terms of the present bias. So one of the big things that I imagine Kristen talks about in the workshop and on her Slack group is just this idea of how much we overvalue the present and pleasure in the present when we're talking about why customers make a certain decision or what will motivate somebody to take an action, right? There's really like, does it feel good and is it immediate? And so oftentimes in dating, people go after the prom date, which is the person who, looks cute in your photos, you want to dance the night away with, maybe have a kiss or more at the end of the night, right? That's really the prom date. But when people are dating, there's this inevitable moment, if they want to get married, et cetera, where they have to shift towards the life partner. And this is somebody who has different qualities. And one of the biggest issues that I see with dating is that people either don't make that shift or they make that shift too late. And so what is the difference between the prom date and the life partner? So the life partner is somebody who you can make hard decisions with, who is going to be there with you during tough times, who you really respect and rely on. And of course, you should have fun with this person and be attracted to them. But really, there is that shift from the person who's fun for now to the person who's fun for now, but also has a lot of the later qualities. And so that's one of the best applications that I've seen in my work of how when people are dating, even in their, let's say, later 30s, they're still going after that person who's exciting or not that nice to them. And what they really need to be doing is going after the person who's going to be a great partner and really somebody who's going to co-found a life together and not just somebody who's going to give them that prom experience. So that was one thing I wanted to share. And then another thing from my book that has really resonated with people is this idea of unrealistic expectations. So if you think about why people are single, it's not, of course, the same reason, right? People have different experiences and people have different circumstances. But through my work, especially in coaching and now applied to my work at Hinge, I have found that there's some things that people have in common. And oftentimes it is this set of unrealistic expectations. And so I've categorized these into a few buckets. So the first one is the romanticizer. And these are people that really just put love on a pedestal and they love love. And they basically feel like, okay, I want to have that meet cute moment where we reach for the same tomato at the same time at the farmer's market and where we really feel like this is my soulmate and it's going to be easy. And so romanticizers are actually pretty good at the beginning of relationships, but inevitably it's hard for them because when they hit that rough spot, which of course we all do, then they say, oh, well, this is getting too hard. It must not be my soulmate. And so I've also seen this with founders, if any of you are in that category, where it's like, oh, I can't wait to start a company and it's going to be so fun. But then when it comes time to, do your taxes and hiring and firing, it's like suddenly not so great. And it kind of, maybe you regret it or you switch jobs or something like that. It's like the romanticizer is very excited about the beginning, but isn't necessarily prepared for what relationships are actually like. And then the second type is the maximizer. And this is a term borrowed from psychology, from the idea of maximizing versus satisficing. So maximizing is I am going to do all of my research. I'm going to turn over every stone. And only when I've seen every possible option will I make a choice. Whereas satisficers set a bar, and it can be a high bar, but once they've found something that achieves that bar, then they say, great, this is it. So it's like, if you're looking for a coffee machine, do you go to every Nespresso store and search all over Amazon and then after weeks of research buy one? Or do you go to one store and say, I need these qualities, and when you find one, you buy it? And so maximizing applied to dating is somebody who says, I need to date all these people, I haven't dated enough, and they feel like if they keep going, then they'll find the perfect person. And really, of course, there is no such thing as a perfect person. It's about finding somebody great and making that great relationship. And so the maximizers get stuck in this pattern of searching. And then the last one is the hesitator. And these are people who feel like they're just not ready to date. Something has to be true for them to date. It has to be, I need a more impressive job. I need to clean my apartment. I need to lose weight. And for them, dating is a state that they're not ready for yet. And they have to do X, Y, and Z to get there. And so with hesitators, it's really about helping them understand that there's no such thing as being 100% ready for anything. And you have to start before you feel ready. And that's really where you grow. And so for hesitators, it's a lot about identity and self-love. And if you're familiar with the research from Todd Rogers at Harvard having to do with voting, there's a difference between saying to somebody, are you going to vote? And are you a voter? And they found that people are actually more likely to show up to vote at the polls the next day if you start with, are you a voter? Because it's invoking an identity in them. And so with hesitators, I do a lot of work to enforce with them, you are a dater. You are a single person who's out there in the world looking for dates and looking for love, as opposed to, oh yeah, if I happen to meet someone, I would go out with them. And so really thinking about the behavioral science principles there of how can you get someone to adopt that identity and what does that mean? Okay, I talked for a while and I'm so much more interested in answering your questions, but that was just a little flavor of what I think about. I also, of course, get to do really interesting research at Hinge, and doing that during the pandemic was just a very lucky time to be there in terms of the dating world changing. But yes, just super excited about the topic of behavioral science and everything that Kristen's doing, and happy to chat about any of your questions.
You guys, the questions are just coming in too fast and furious on the chat. Just kidding. We can use the chat, or if you want to actually raise your hand, we can call
That's
on
so
both.
funny.
Or I have some softballs for Logan. So
yeah, Kristen, just make it up.
okay.
But it looks
by the
like
way,
Lynn has her hand up.
Yeah, Lynn, is this a hand that was up from before, or it's a new hand? Perfect. Lynn, you're up.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So first, I just want to share something, and then I have a question for Logan. So it's going back to your prom date versus life partner analogy or framework. And it struck me because this is something I've thought about, same bias, but sort of the flip side of that. I was really struck. I went to one of my high school reunions. I'm going to guess it was like my 20th reunion or something. And someone came up to me and said, you know, your prom date's really famous, right? And I've thought about this a lot since then, because there's so many now men that I was friendly with in high school that I would never have dated or considered romantically, who now as grown men are so much better looking, so much more mature, and so successful. And I go, what was I thinking back then? Right? And in fact, it's true. Like, I did not have a boyfriend my senior year in the spring. I went to my senior prom with a guy that I was very friendly with. I mean, we were very close friends, but we were, you know, it was totally platonic. He was kind of quiet, very studious intellectual in high school. And he is now a world-renowned scientist, author, and speaker. And I won't give his name, but you know, and I go, and the nicest guy still, you know, but and I go, yeah, what was I thinking? So I had the flip side of that, and it just,
you know, I actually think it is like, I see how in terms of words it's the opposite, but I actually feel like it's reinforcing the same principle, which is like the people, and not trying to make this like too heteronormative or gendered, but it's like the group of women who found certain guys hot in high school and who they wanted to go to the prom with, right? That the qualities they were looking for are different than the qualities they might be looking for in a partner 10 or 15 years later. And so you happen to have gone to prom with someone who did have those later in life qualities. And so really the idea to people is like, I'm not saying that from middle school on, you have to be looking for the person who's going to pick up your kids from the dentist. Like, obviously that's, way too early to put that pressure on yourself, but understand that people do fall into different categories, and that the kind of guy who might seem too boring or available when you're younger is exactly who would make a really great long-term partner. And that maybe we know that philosophically or hypothetically, but that actually there is a shift that needs to be made, because so many of the people that I work with in a coaching capacity really still are going for that person that plays hard to get, that person who is hot and cold. And it's like, yeah, you're addicted to some of that drama, and you have these butterflies that are really anxiety. And so it's really about going after a different type of person and sort of learning to like it. And so it's like, you happen to have had a prom date who was kind of the life partner persona.
Yeah, but so my
Yeah.
question, I'm sorry, Kristen, so I saw you on mute. Can I ask the question, or you want?
Yeah, I would ask the question, and we have now some coming in the chat. So it's a ask it, and Logan will fire back, and then we may have to move on for others too.
Sure. So I have, full disclosure, have not read your book, although it's been sitting in my save for later Amazon cart since I first heard about it, which was through months ago, another
Make the purchase.
Well, Mike, so my question is sort of a, twofold. The book, is it really for like young people who have never been married, and sort of the follow-on to that is, do you see any differences in biases, or how you kind of analyze the data or coach people, whether they are youngish, never been married, or, second, third time, out for whatever reason?
Sure. Yeah. I would say, the bias going into my work is that prior to my book coming out, I had mostly worked with people who I would say, like, let's say 40 and under, most of whom had never been married. And I do think that there's sort of a mentality that you have in that scenario, right? Like, you likely don't have children, you're making decisions for the first time, you have a variety of experiences. So that was the group that I had the most experience with. But since the book came out almost 2 years ago, I've had emails from people of all ages saying, my daughter had this and I picked it up and I thought it was for her, but actually there's so much in there for me. And so I think that's why some of these things are really universal. It's not like magically when you turn 40, you realize what kind of person to go for. I have worked with people in their 60s that are still making the kind of mistakes that people make in their 20s. So it really speaks to the universality of these biases, and also the universality of certain dating and relationship trends. And so I'd say the research that it's based on is more people under 40, but that I've been told by people of different generations that it's been helpful, especially someone who hasn't used dating apps. They feel like it's a good kind of dating app 101 that debunks how alienating it can feel or how hard it can feel, and just gets people to download an app and try. And then your second one was, do I see different? I think I answered that actually, because it's really about like the universality. Great. Thanks for your enthusiasm and for asking the first question.
We're going to go Dr. Karen Beard and then Sharon's question, and then we'll move on from that. So I would like Logan, and Karen, feel free to take yourself off mute if you would like. I would like Logan to say more about the B principle to get people to adopt an identity. And I'm assuming this may be in relation to the like the hesitator comment on identity, but if not, feel free to clarify.
Yeah, so I can speak. So the most famous study that I'm familiar with is the voting one, because it's really pretty simple. It's like you have people visit somebody the day before an election, then you look at those people who were asked the question, are you a voter versus are you planning to vote? And you see that the people who reinforce the identity of being a voter are more likely to show up. But the general research around this is that we all play different roles in our lives. So it's like somebody is a parent and a daughter and a Beyonce fan. And so you can get them to make different decisions at different points in time by reinforcing one identity. So for example, if you want somebody to upgrade their car to the biggest safety features, you're probably not going to remind them that they love Beyonce. you're going to remind them that they're a parent and that this feature has saved this many lives since it was invented. And so by reinforcing their identity as a parent, you can get them to make a different choice in that purchasing decision by reminding them about an aspect of their lives. Kristen, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, nailed it. I think one kind of general hypothesis people tend to have in behavior change is you have to like persuade somebody to get them to do the thing, and then they will have the identity. And I think the contrarian view of behavioral science is actually just doing a thing is the most important. And if you feel like you have the identity first, that could actually get you to do the thing. And so you know, it doesn't have to be a persuasive effort to get you to be somebody who is a runner. You can actually feel like I am a runner, and then you know, that could motivate you to go out for the run.
Yeah.
So
and I'll add one thing there, which is the book Atomic Habits obviously is extremely popular, and probably many of you have read it. It sold millions of copies, but one of his big things that he constantly talks about is like, actually habit change is really hard, and instead, can you adopt the identity of the person you want to be? So saying, I am a healthy person. What would a healthy person do? Okay, they would take the stairs instead of the escalator. They would order the salad instead of the sandwich. And so I personally find that hard, but that's where he's coming from, where he's saying, like, you don't just have to suddenly overnight develop all these habits. You have to channel what would a person who already has this habit and identity do, and then try to make those choices.
and Logan, to your point, just do something. So like by doing something, you will then embody the person that you want to be. So if you want to go on a date, you should just go on the date. And then you will be a dater.
Yeah, I
Okay,
love that.
great. So Sharon says, I love the segmentation. How did you get to the segmentation? Data observation, question mark.
Sure. Yeah. So it was interesting. I wrote my book before I worked at Hinge. So the data that I had access to was really the people that I had coached. And so I had coached a wide breadth of people. I did a lot of free coaching. I did a lot of international coaching. So I feel like it was a pretty broad spectrum of people. It wasn't just like people I knew in the Bay Area. But yes, it was much more based on who I spoke to when I coach them, and really thinking about, okay, what do they all have in common? They all come to me with unrealistic expectations, and then breaking it down into unrealistic expectations of relationships, unrealistic expectations of partner, and unrealistic expectations of themselves. So that was all based on the individual coaching that I had done versus anything more quantitative. But since then, I have had many thousands of people take the quiz on my website where people can find out what they are, and it has been really interesting to start to get more specific numbers around what different groups of people are, especially by age. I haven't done a full analysis, but now after the book came out and with more people taking the quiz online, it is interesting to see how it all breaks down.
Wonderful. Okay, moving on. Avi, if you're comfortable, would you take yourself off mute and maybe ask your question? I feel like I may not do it justice.
Hey, yeah, sorry, my connection's a little iffy. Hopefully you can hear me. I was curious about the challenges around informational symmetry in dating, and which aspects in particular are toughest to get information on, and whether that there's different profiles within the segmentation of feeling like you have enough data to make a decision. Another book I think about is Algorithms to Live By, as it relates to some of these types of challenges. I'm not sure if there's any of those types of archetypes.
Sure. Yeah. Are you talking about informational symmetry, like when I was doing my research to make these archetypes? Or are you talking about like when people are dating, what I know about you versus what you know about me?
Yeah,
Sorry,
the
the
latter
second one?
of
Okay.
the data.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I haven't thought about it that way, but it does make sense to me that different people take different amounts of time to reveal information. We just did a bunch of research on this at Hinge in our last quarter, where we were talking about how much people want emotional vulnerability on a date. and why people don't give that to them. And so the main reasons are things like people feel like they'll be rejected, people feel like it's embarrassing, but actually people are very drawn to emotional vulnerability, especially when people share things like their hopes and their dreams or what's happened to them around dating. And so that's one thing where I think there is a mismatch where people want a lot more sharing, but then people are afraid to share. There's also, of course, attachment theory has become really popular in the last year. It's kind of big on dating TikTok. And part of attachment theory is, one group of people is anxious and really wants to get into a relationship and be in touch and constantly be reassured. And another group of people wants separation, has fear of being smothered, and feels like they need to pull away. And these people end up dating each other in something called the anxious avoidant loop. And that's really problematic because the anxious people are reinforcing this idea that love is somebody that I need to chase. And the avoidant people are reinforcing the idea that love is when somebody smothers me and I have to pull away. And so in that situation, it's like they have different sets of needs and perhaps they're sharing different amounts of information. And it's really not until those people break out of that loop and date someone who's more secure or become more secure themselves that they're able to overcome it. So I would say I don't have specific information about the three types of daters in terms of informational symmetry, but absolutely it's a problem where somebody knows they don't want a serious relationship, but somebody else who they're dating doesn't know that. And actually, Hinge has some cool product features that launched pretty recently around this. So they have dating intentions. So what kind of relationship are you looking for? Casual, long-term, open to long-term, figuring it out. And they have relationship types where you can talk about if you want monogamy or not. So it's kind of like, how do you take some of the asymmetry and how do you solve it even on a profile?
Great. I'm gonna just hop in right there because we're talking about profiles. What are the common mistakes people make on their dating profile? This is not a
Yeah.
question from the
Oh,
audience.
sure. Yeah,
This is
there's a
just
lot of
question.
them. One of them is having old photos. So there really can be a feeling of, well, this is my best photo. And it's like, yes, but it's not accurate for now. And so you kind of have this question of, do I want to have more people like me? But then when they show up, they're disappointed because the delta between how I look in my picture and how I look in real life is large. Or do I want to have a more realistic photo? Or maybe I get less incoming likes, but it's true. And when people show up on a date with me, they'll feel like, oh yeah, she looks like her pictures. That's such a common thing. Like, did they look like their pictures or not? Another common mistake is just not having enough variety. So I was looking at a woman's profile where she had done a photo shoot with her dog and they were cute pictures, but she basically had 4 out of 6 pictures were of that same photo shoot. And I was like, we're just not getting enough information about you. We just know like you have a dog and you wore that outfit that day on that street. And so really your profile is a chance to tell a story, to have variety, and that when you are in a situation where you are only showing one side of yourself, you're really missing out on talking about different parts of your story.
Wonderful. Love it. Okay. Are there any differences when it comes to the LGBTQ community from your?
So generally the kind of response to this for a long time from relationship scientists and people in academia has been, there hasn't been that much research done on LGBTQ plus dating, but when it has been done, a lot of these trends are universal. That being said, more research is being done in this area. I know at Hinge, it's a huge priority for us, understanding what makes queer dating different. And so I haven't been a huge part of this project, but we have this great website called NFAQ, so not frequently asked questions, where really some of the nuances of LGBTQ plus dating are addressed. So things like, do I have to come out as non-monogamous to the person I'm seeing? Or as I'm transitioning, what should I put as my gender on my profile? And really getting into the nuances. And so I think as the market around dating apps and dating in general matures, there's just more nuances for different types of daters, gender identity, sexual orientation, all of that stuff. And so I think we'll see even more research in the future about how this is different.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll go on. We're gonna rapid fire some of these just because I know people want their questions answered. So I'm gonna And I think we usually end these around 9:40, or there's a 45-minute session. So we've got about 10 to 15 minutes left of hanging out together. What have been some of your most surprising learnings at Hinge?
Oh, let's see. So at the beginning, so I started at Hinge 3 years ago. So basically, like at the beginning of the pandemic, and right away, it was interesting how people just did not give up on love. Like that March 2020, there were way more messages sent than the previous March. And in retrospect, it kind of makes sense. Like people are home alone. They were using a lot of digital products, including online dating, but it was just refreshing to see how resilient people are and how much they still wanted to put effort into dating. The kind of next step from there is that I know a bunch of people who were the kind of person who either weren't dating at all or were constantly going on dates but not getting into a relationship with someone. And somehow the pandemic really changed that, where instead of having all these options that they couldn't choose from, they had one person in front of them. They had to focus on them because obviously there was like quarantine pods and you wanted to limit your exposure, and in limiting that choice and just having one person, there was really a feeling of, oh, now I can invest. And so I know multiple of these people that are married, have kids, have bought houses, things like that, and I feel like I really knew them for a while, and it was the pandemic that changed that feeling of choice overload and really allowed them to focus. I'm trying to think if there's tons of great research. Yeah, a couple things. We've done a lot of research into mental health and how for daters, especially Gen Z, having somebody who takes care of their own mental health and might even go to therapy is a turn on. You can imagine even just a generation ago would have been like, why is this person telling me about therapy? This is a red flag. And now it's considered a green flag, where it's like, I go to therapy, I want you to go to therapy. And then there's also been a rise of sober dating, people really feeling like they want to meet you. They don't want to meet the 2 drinks that you had. And I even saw an article in the New York Times today talking about how sober dating and dry January have actually hurt the bottom line of establishments that rely on income from alcohol. And so this really is a trend.
But people are smoking pot, right? Just kidding.
Oh yeah, what do they call it? California sober. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So there's a theme in the chat around friendship, which is kind of fun, which is what about the biases that apply to dating also apply to friendship, and maybe how can you use some of that to get more friends? I'm paraphrasing from the group, but so feel free to hop in if folks have more specifics, but I'll drop that one first.
Sure. So I wouldn't consider myself a friendship expert, but I am in a writers group where multiple people are. So there's a person that I know, Kristen knows, named Smiley Pozwalski, and he wrote a book called Friendship in the Age of Loneliness, which you might want to check out. And then another person in that group, her name's Dr. Marissa Franco. Her book called Platonic has really blown up. And so if my book is behavioral science and psychology principles applied to dating, her book is really the best of psychology on friendship. So I would highly recommend it. In terms of the general themes, like some of these are just universal themes about people, which is one of the best ways to get into a friendship with somebody is by being vulnerable. When you present a very glossy exterior, there's no hook for somebody to grab onto. Somebody just feels like, oh, well, how would I connect with them? They seem like their life is perfect, which of course it's not. But sometimes people feel like, oh, others will like me if I give off this perfect exterior. And in fact, it's the opposite. It's others will like you when you're vulnerable because you make them feel better about themselves, and they feel like their imperfections are okay because you have imperfections. And so they feel more comfortable connecting with you. I've actually probably done more work applying the principles from my book to entrepreneurship versus friendship, but I would really recommend those books, especially Marissa Franco's book, Platonic.
Nice. What other insight could be, so in dating and in going back and forth between people, sometimes it's just sending a message that gets you to have more at-bats. And I would imagine the same thing with friendship, which is, you may have to make the first move and may have to make it a few times to actually figure out if they are going to be somebody that you can have a longer term friendship with. And sometimes it's just about, maybe this is a overweight of behavioral science, but just about doing something. And so reaching out to somebody and showing them that you're available and free could actually be help. For folks who asked the question, any ads or clarifications? We had about 3 folks who kind of piled on here. Don't worry, we'll end with the love is blind question. So I know everyone's waiting on that, but like it's gonna be the end.
Oh gosh, I
Yeah,
need to think about that.
just seeding that. Okay, we're gonna go to Dr. Mora Somers. I've seen a lot of data on how important kindness is in the selection of a romantic partner, but so many daters can't get beyond the physical appearance gate, either because they're deemed unattractive themselves or because they're only willing to date highly attractive people. How do we get into action with the kindness criterion?
Yeah, great question and very aligned with my thinking on this. So, in my book, in the chapter about the prom date versus the life partner, I talk about the things that matter less than people think they do and the things that matter more. So, in the less category are things like looks and money. Obviously, they matter, but they matter less than people think they do because of adaptation. We just really get used to whatever is around us. And that's why a lot of the research shows you get used to your circumstances, whether it's something unexpected that you wouldn't want to have, like becoming paralyzed, or something that you would really want to have, like becoming a lottery winner, and that people a year or 2 out are actually around the same level of happiness that they were before, that we just sort of adapt to our surroundings. Another one that people value more than they should is having the same personality or having the same hobbies. These matter, but it's definitely something that can be overcome. The things that matter more than people think they do are things like kindness, as you said, emotional stability, the ability to make decisions together. And then what's really become my favorite one is what side of you that person brings out. And so, really thinking on the date, not are they good enough for me, but who am I around them? Really, even if they're great on paper, if they make me feel anxious or self conscious, obviously that's not working. And then in terms of how to make a shift around this, my little addition to this project is that I have kind of developed this slogan or tagline of F the spark, although I usually curse, but I don't know what the rules are here. And basically just helping people understand that that initial feeling of attraction on a date often leads us astray. So there's basically 3 main myths around the spark. One is that it can't grow over time, which isn't true. A lot of people end up dating someone who they live with or who they work with, because over time that proximity and that constant exposure really makes you like someone more. The second myth is that if you feel the spark, it's a good thing. That's not true. Sometimes that spark is that anxiety, or actually a sign that the person is just really good looking and they give the spark to everyone, but you think it's this unique thing between the two of you. And finally, thinking that if you have a spark, the relationship is a good one. And lots of people who are in unhappy relationships or are divorced once had the spark. It's good enough to start, but it doesn't keep it going. And so my addition to this is to really think about going after the slow burn. And it's kind of going back to Lynn's point about her prom date. It's really going after someone like that who maybe isn't initially the most exciting, but is a great person, is reliable, is going to be someone that you can create a great life with, versus the person who's really exciting from the beginning, but might end up letting you down.
And maybe the fun fact about both Logan and I, we are now married to friends that we had. So I think, I was friends with Phil for 2 years before we started something. Logan was friends with Scott for a year or so before they started something and knew each other before. And so it is real.
Yeah.
Like this
Great
slow
point.
burn is a real thing.
Totally.
Wonderful. So we have about 5 minutes left. One thing that I have liked about, so Logan's book gives you a lot of tools that you actually like tactical tools that you can do today. And so just following up on like after you go on a date, what are the questions you should ask yourself? I mean, by the way, so in behavioral science, a lot of behavior change is just like a checklist where you're saying it's not about making a decision about the exact right thing to do in the moment. It's about having the thing planned so that when you are in the moment, you know exactly what to do. And this kind of questions is kind of a script for you after you finish a date of how you should process the date. Do you want to give any info?
Sure. Yeah. So, what Kristen said is exactly right. And some of the research that influenced me is research on gratitude journals, where tons of research on this, but in particular, Sean Acor, where it just talks about if you know at the end of the day, you have to write down 5 good things that happened to you, it trains your brain to look for them. So maybe you would catch the bus instead of missing it and just forget about it a minute later. If you know at the end of the day you're looking for those things, you pay attention to it. And so using that concept, I came up with this idea of the post-date 8, which are 8 questions to ask yourself after a date. And it's supposed to train your mind to experience the date in a different way. So the questions are much more like, what side of me did this person bring out? Did I feel relaxed around them, or did I feel anxious? Did I feel energized or de-energized? And so you're paying much more attention to the experience of how you feel around that person versus the typical checklist people have, which is, what school did she go to? Is she good looking enough for me? Is she ambitious enough? And so it's like, we sort of naturally have a checklist anyway. Let me shift your checklist towards what I think matters and what the research shows matters, and get you away from that resume checklist.
Amazing. Great. Okay. We have Shelly, did you want to take yourself off mute? You said, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, thank you. Sort of just a full disclosure, my background is as a neuropsychologist, so sort of a lens, and I'm very new to behavioral science. And what I would love to hear is, from a behavioral science lens, how do you explain and bring in, for example, intergenerational patterns or person's relationships with their current family members or parents? Because what I've found in my experience is a lot of that also weighs into how people behave in relationships. I wasn't sure from a behavioral science perspective if there's science behind that and the questions you ask.
Yeah, so I'll just give one quick example, which is the importance of role models. So we know from research that role models are very important in general aspects of life. There's even a finding that if women grow up in a zip code where there's more female inventors, then women are more likely to become inventors themselves, even if they don't know they're those inventors. It sort of just has to do with like what's going on in that neighborhood. And similarly, it's like with a 4-minute mile, it felt like nobody could ever run a sub 4-minute mile, and then somebody did, and now thousands of people have done it. And so I think a lot about relationship role models and what did you see growing up. But it doesn't mean that if your parents were never married or had a bad relationship that you're doomed. I've seen the opposite happen, where that was your experience, and then you're extra careful about choosing somebody and you invest a lot in your relationship. And then I've seen people who have parents that are really happily married, and sometimes it works out well, and sometimes they feel like, I'll never live up to my parents' marriage. Like, I didn't meet my person in high school. And so that's just one example, I would say, of how the environment that you grew up in does have an impact on you, but it's certainly not something that's determined from birth, because there's so many different ways that you can respond to the same stimuli.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, if folks can stay after, we're going to do 2 more questions. One is going to be Avi's, and then the other is going to be an overview of what Logan thinks about Love is Blind.
Great.
Okay, have heard some theories that people seek partners in aspects that they are themselves insecure about. Any research or thoughts on this?
I haven't done any research into this, but I would just say anecdotally, I have seen this happen sometimes. So sometimes it'll be less about insecurity, but more about aspiration. So it's like, I wish I were more ambitious, so I'm going to try to find someone really ambitious and then hope that that rubs off on me. And that usually just doesn't work. And so it's like, you should date someone who you enjoy the partnership with, not dating someone who you wish you were more like. Of course, it's great if you admire your partner, but in general, I would say that trying to fill in the gap in a part of your personality that you find lacking just rarely works, and instead is frustrating. And I can even say that about myself. My husband works out every day. He's vegan. He's super healthy. And I feel like in the beginning, I found it really intriguing and I admired it, because that's not that easy for me. But, 8 years into being with him, I don't really think it's rubbed off, because in some ways, there's just all these different things that happen in relationships. And one of them is that you might both double down on your personalities in order to have more independence or more difference from each other. So I would say, yes, it happens. And I think it rarely ends up helping the person in the way they think it would, because there's just all these different ways that it can turn out. And it rarely makes somebody feel more secure about something they feel insecure about. And then do you want me to just jump into Love is Blind?
Yes, please. Everyone's waiting.
Sure.
Can't
Yeah,
wait.
yeah. I mean, I don't think I have the hottest takes, but I did see season 1. There were aspects of it that I really liked. I liked the idea that taking away the physical attributes really help people connect in a different way. So one thing that I'm really a proponent of is going against your type. So you think like, oh, I have a type, I have to find someone like that. It's like, okay, well, if you've been single and dating for a while, maybe the person you're going to be happiest with isn't that so-called type. And so I think it really helped achieve that, especially in the first season. I remember, there was an interracial relationship with, I think it was like Lauren and Conrad. I think that was their names, unless I'm confusing names from the OC. But I think that maybe they would not have met otherwise, and now they seem to be really happy and in this great relationship. And so there's this feeling of what can you learn about somebody when you don't have physical information about them? That being said, a lot of those relationships didn't work out. OkCupid also did a study many years ago where they had this day where they turned off all pictures and they saw what kind of connections people made, and they did make a lot of connections, but they didn't end up following up on them. So I think in the end, it's like, the show is a nice reminder that when you take away the physical aspects and you just focus on voice and personality, different things emerge. But at the end of the day, when you reintroduce that information, I think people have the same biases they did before.
Like, that's an uplifting and sad as well.
Yeah.
And that's how we'll end. Actually, so thanks, Logan, for doing this. This is really lovely. For folks if you have a question that you still want to ask, you can also always plop it in the Ask a Behavioral Scientist, and one of us will weigh in with this. And if you're in the course right now, the way to kind of continue getting access to these events is to stick around and become a member after you finish the course. If you're in the course, it's just a nudge to do your homework. Learning is about doing. It's not just about reading the materials, but you actually have to engage with it. So that's my nag there. Yeah.
Oh, Kristen, I forgot to ask you this, but if I could self promote this, but I do have a dating boot camp myself that launched today. So if anyone's interested or has a friend who's single where they're like, how do I support my friend? All the information's on my website, or Kristen can send it out.
Yeah, we'll post it in the Slack for sure, and would highly recommend it. We've had know lots of people who go through it multiple times because it's so helpful to get them in the mindset of dating and finding love, and you meet a lot of also fun and interesting people there as well. Okay, so that's a wrap. We'll see many of you guys for Julie's chat. The pro tip is just to stay aligned with the events section in the Slack, and you'll get all the invites to these things. On that note, go forth and date or find love.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you all. Bye.